Balkan Ghost, Bosnia, 1995. Al-Bab, Syria, 2016. Breach, Ukraine, 2023. Steel Wall, Ukraine, 2024.
It has been called the backbone of European armor for over 4 decades. The Leopard 2 tank has rolled across deserts, frozen plains, and war-torn cities in the hands of over 18 nations. From the mountains of Afghanistan to the grinding front lines of Ukraine, this German-engineered machine has faced every generation of anti-tank weapon ever built. Some missions proved its legend. Others exposed brutal vulnerabilities that cost crews their lives. One battle shattered its myth of invincibility so completely that engineers had to redesign the doctrine around it. Another proved that in the right hands, this 62-ton machine could dominate a modern battlefield that experts swore had made tanks obsolete. What you are about to see is every mission that defined the Leopard 2. From its first deployment as a silent guardian in the Balkans to its most desperate hours on the front lines of the largest European ground war since World War II. In 1995, the war in Bosnia had devolved into urban nightmares. Snipers controlled intersections. Mortars fell without warning on civilian corridors. The United Nations needed armored presence that could absorb fire and project dominance without triggering escalation. Canada deployed its older Leopard C2 variants, but it was the Dutch contingent that brought true Leopard 2A4 platforms into the Bosnian theater for the first time. The Dutch positioned their Leopard 2s along key supply corridors connecting Srebrenica and Sarajevo. Their mission was not to fight. It was to exist. 62 tons of composite armor parked at intersections sent a message that no infantry patrol could replicate. Bosnian Serb forces probing the perimeter identified the thermal signatures from their reconnaissance positions and immediately withdrew. The 120mm Rheinmetall smoothbore never fired a single round in anger during the entire deployment window, but the psychological mass of the platform accomplished what months of diplomacy had failed to achieve. Convoys moving under Leopard 2 escort reported 0 ambushes across the entire deployment period. Aid trucks that had been stopped at gunpoint for weeks rolled through without incident once the tanks took position. Intelligence analysts later confirmed that Bosnian Serb artillery batteries repositioned away from Leopard 2 patrol zones within 72 hours of their arrival. The tank altered force calculations across 3 warring factions simultaneously without firing a shot. Commanders noted that the Leopard 2's thermal imaging capability meant snipers who had operated freely for months suddenly found themselves visible at ranges they considered safe. Yet Bosnia was peacekeeping under rules of engagement that forbade offensive action. The Leopard 2 had projected power without ever proving it could survive a real fight. No enemy had fired a dedicated anti-tank weapon at its hull. No crew had tested the composite array under actual combat stress. That test was coming in a theater no one predicted. In 2006, Denmark committed Leopard 2A5 tanks to the International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan. This was unprecedented. NATO doctrine had never envisioned deploying heavy main battle tanks in mountain counterinsurgency. The terrain was hostile to tracked vehicles in every dimension. Fine talcum like dust infiltrated every mechanical seal. Elevation changes between 300 and 1500 meters exceeded standard transmission tolerances. Temperatures swung from 50 degrees Celsius in summer to -20 in winter. Critics across multiple defense establishments said the Leopard 2 would be a 60-ton liability that consumed fuel and blocked roads. The Leopard 2A5 features an upgraded turret with wedge-shaped composite add-on armor modules that deflect kinetic penetrators at extreme angles. The wedge armor adds an air gap between the outer steel plate and the inner composite array, disrupting shape-charged jets before they reach the primary protection layer. Its thermal imaging system operates in 2 independent channels, allowing target identification through dust storms, smoke screens, and complete darkness at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters. Danish crews proved the critics catastrophically wrong in Helmand province. Operating from forward operating bases along the Helmand River Valley, Leopard 2s provided direct fire support for infantry units clearing Taliban compounds that had resisted everything else in the coalition arsenal. The 120mm gun demolished fortified mud brick walls that were over 1 meter thick. Positions that had absorbed 50 caliber machine gun fire for hours collapsed in a single round. In one engagement near Juresh in 2008, a single Leopard 2 identified 3 separate Taliban firing positions across a 1,200-meter front using its thermal sights. The crew engaged all 3 in sequence. 6 rounds fired in under 90 seconds. All 6 hit. Taliban fighters in a 4th prepared position abandoned it without firing a shot rather than face a second volley. The tank absorbed multiple RPG-7 hits during its Afghan tours. The warheads detonated against the composite armor array and space side skirts exactly as designed. None penetrated. Not one. Denmark operated Leopard 2 tanks in Afghanistan for years and lost 0 platforms to enemy action across the entire deployment. But Afghanistan was asymmetric warfare against lightly armed insurgents with decades-old anti-tank weapons. What happens when the Leopard 2 meets a peer-equipped enemy carrying modern tandem warhead missiles? In December 2016, Turkey launched Operation Euphrates Shield to clear Islamic State fighters from northern Syria. Turkish armed forces deployed Leopard 2A4 tanks alongside older M60 Sabra variants in a combined armored push. The Leopard 2 spearheaded the advance toward Al-Bab, a heavily fortified ISIS stronghold ringed with prepared defensive positions. The Leopard 2A4 deployed by Turkey features the original flat turret profile without the wedge armor upgrades of later variants. Its protection suite includes first-generation composite armor rated against 1980s-era kinetic and chemical threats. 120mm Rheinmetall L44 smoothbore gun with a 44 caliber barrel length and a fire control system optimized for open terrain engagements against Soviet-era armor formations. What followed became the most catastrophic single engagement in Leopard 2 combat history. ISIS fighters had spent months preparing kill zones with pre-positioned anti-tank guided missile teams. Kornet and Konkur's missiles struck Turkish Leopard 2A4s from multiple angles simultaneously using coordinated ambush tactics. At least 10 Leopard 2 tanks were hit in the Al-Bab corridor. Several suffered catastrophic kills. Their turrets were blown completely off the hull ring by ammunition cook-offs that detonated the stored rounds inside the turret bustle. Graphic footage spread across the internet within hours showing burning Leopard 2 hulls with their distinctive turret silhouettes lying inverted beside the chassis. The failures were systematic. Turkey had deployed the oldest production variant without any active protection systems. Crews advanced into narrow urban corridors without dismounted infantry screens. Tanks pushed forward without aerial or ground reconnaissance confirming clear routes. The 2A4's flat turret face presented near perpendicular surfaces to incoming missiles, offering minimal deflection angles against modern tandem warhead designs that were specifically engineered to defeat flat composite arrays. Al-Bab shattered the myth of Leopard 2 invincibility overnight. But buried inside the disaster was a data point that engineers noticed immediately. Several crews survived direct penetrating strikes because the blowout ammunition compartment panels functioned exactly as designed. The blast vented upward and away from the crew compartment. The tank was not invincible. It was survivable. There is a difference. Turkey did not abandon the Leopard 2 after Al-Bab. In January 2018, Operation Olive Branch pushed into the Afrin region of northern Syria, targeting Kurdish YPG positions. This time, Turkish commanders rewrote the playbook using lessons that had been paid for in blood and burning steel 14 months earlier. Leopard 2A4 tanks operated exclusively behind infantry screens that cleared corridors before armor advanced. Armored vehicles moved only after drone reconnaissance flights confirmed no anti-tank positions along the planned route. Tanks engaged from hull-down positions at maximum effective gun range rather than pushing into urban kill zones where missile teams could engage from multiple angles. The 120mm gun destroyed fortified positions from 1,500 meters. That distance, the Leopard 2's fire control system gave it a decisive first-round hit probability while remaining outside the effective engagement envelope of most man-portable anti-tank missiles. Crews used terrain masking to limit their exposure windows to under 30 seconds per firing position. After each engagement, tanks reversed behind cover and repositioned laterally before reappearing. The result was dramatic. Turkish Leopard 2s delivered devastating fire support across the Afrin offensive without suffering a single confirmed catastrophic kill. No Leopard 2 was documented as destroyed during Operation Olive Branch. The same platform that died in the streets of Al-Bab dominated the approaches to Afrin because commanders finally employed it the way Krauss-Maffei engineers had intended. Doctrine mattered as much as armor thickness. Tactical discipline mattered more than turret geometry. The platform had not changed. The operators had. The Leopard 2 had been bloodied and redeemed within 14 months. But its greatest test was still years away. Modern reactive armor arrays function by detonating a small explosive charge outward when struck by an incoming projectile. This counter-explosion disrupts the shape-charged jet of chemical energy warheads before they can bore through the primary composite armor plate behind. The Leopard 2A7 integrates modular armor packages that can accept both passive composite inserts and explosive reactive armor elements depending on the anticipated threat environment. allowing field-level reconfiguration between anti-kinetic and anti-chemical protection profiles. In 2022, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine triggered the largest tank war in Europe since 1945. Western nations began transferring Leopard 2 variants to Ukraine under emergency defense packages. Canada shipped 2 A4s from storage. Germany authorized 2 A6 deliveries from active Bundeswehr inventory. Poland, Spain, Portugal, Norway, Denmark, and the Netherlands followed with additional platforms. By mid-2023, Ukrainian armored brigades operated mixed fleets of Leopard 2A4 and 2A6 tanks integrated alongside their existing Soviet-era T-64 and T-72 formations. The Leopard 2A6 brought one critical hardware upgrade. Its Rheinmetall L55 gun barrel extended the 120mm smoothbore by 1.3 meters over the original L44. This longer barrel increased muzzle velocity by approximately 50 meters per second, translating to roughly 15% greater armor penetration at combat ranges. Against Russian T-72B3 and T-80B VM tanks, the L55 provided reliable first-hit kill capability at distances where Russian return fire could not penetrate Leopard 2 frontal composite arrays. Ukrainian crews compressed their training timeline from the standard NATO 12 months to under 5 weeks. The Leopard 2's ergonomic turret layout, digital fire control computer, and integrated thermal imaging system shortened the learning curve dramatically compared to Soviet-era manual systems. Crews reported identifying targets at ranges their previous T-64s could not even detect. This was the mission the Leopard 2 had been designed for 40 years earlier: armored maneuver warfare against a peer mechanized adversary on the European plain. The question was whether Cold War doctrine still functioned in the age of loitering drones and satellite-guided precision munitions. In June 2023, Ukraine launched its summer counteroffensive. Leopard 2A6 tanks spearheaded combined arms assault formations driving into prepared Russian defensive lines near the village of Robotyne in Zaporizhzhia Oblast. The Russian military had constructed the most elaborate defensive fortifications seen in European warfare since 1944. Minefields stretched 3 to 5 kilometers deep in overlapping belts. Anti-tank ditches channeled vehicles into pre-registered kill zones. Hornet missile teams occupied concealed positions in tree lines with overlapping fields of fire. K-52 attack helicopters orbited beyond visual range carrying Vickers laser-guided missiles. The opening engagement was brutal. The Leopard 2A4 struck an anti-tank mine during the initial breach attempt. The blast severed its left track and immobilized the vehicle in the open. The crew survived the mine strike, activated smoke dispensers, and was evacuated under covering fire from a second Leopard 2. Minutes later, a Leopard 2A6 took a direct cornet hit to the turret face. The wedge armor's angled composite array deflected the shaped-charged jet away from the crew compartment. The tank continued fighting. Battlefield video confirmed the same Leopard 2 firing multiple rounds after absorbing the missile impact. But the minefields were the true enemy. Russian engineers had laid anti-tank mines at densities exceeding 1 mine per linear meter across some sectors. Mine-clearing vehicles struggled to open lanes fast enough for the armor to advance. Leopard 2 tanks sat idling in exposed positions waiting for breaches, drawing Russian artillery fire and Lancet loitering munitions that targeted stationary thermal signatures. Ukraine lost several Leopard 2 tanks during the initial offensive weeks. Most losses were mine damage and mobility kills rather than catastrophic turret penetrations. Critically, 0 Leopard 2 crew members were confirmed killed by direct fire during the entire Robotyne push. Crew survivability systems performed exactly as designed even when the vehicle itself was destroyed as a fighting platform. The counteroffensive ground forward meter by meter. The Leopard 2 did not deliver the armored breakthrough that planners had hoped for, but it kept its crews alive through conditions that annihilated older Soviet-era tanks by the hundreds. By late 2023, Ukrainian Leopard 2 crews had adapted to the drone-saturated battlefield through methods that appeared in no NATO training manual and no Krauss-Maffei operator handbook. Tanks moved primarily between dusk and dawn. Crews draped multispectral thermal camouflage netting over engine decks and exhaust ports to reduce infrared signatures visible to drone-mounted thermal cameras. Movement patterns became deliberately erratic, with tanks repositioning laterally after every 2 to 3 shots to deny drone operators a predictable return-to-position pattern. Thermal camouflage systems work by inserting an insulating barrier layer between the vehicle's hot metallic surfaces and the surrounding environment. Multispectral camouflage netting combines infrared reflective fibers with heat-absorbing padding that reduces the thermal contrast between the tank hull and ambient terrain temperature by up to 70%. This makes detection by infrared imaging sensors significantly more difficult at standoff ranges beyond 500 meters, forcing drone operators to close within visual identification range where the tank's own countermeasures become effective. One documented engagement from this period showed a Leopard 2A6 identifying and destroying two Russian BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles at night from 2,300 meters. The Russian vehicle crews never detected the firing position before both vehicles were hit. The Leopard 2's third-generation thermal sight acquired both targets through light ground fog that rendered standard optical systems useless. The L-55 gun's superior accuracy at extended range meant both rounds connected before any defensive reaction was possible. By the time Russian forces identified the approximate firing location, the Leopard 2 had already displaced 400 meters to an alternate position. Ukrainian brigade commanders reported that Leopard 2 units consistently achieved kill-to-loss ratios significantly exceeding those of T-64BV and T-72B units operating in adjacent sectors against the same Russian formations. The thermal optics and fire control advantage proved decisive in every long-range engagement where the Leopard 2 could fight from standoff distance. But the drone threat had fundamentally changed armored warfare. Tanks could no longer operate the way they had for the previous 50 years. The Leopard 2 survived because its crews reinvented doctrine in real time on a battlefield that was rewriting the rules of mechanized combat every week. In 2024, as the conflict ground into its third year, Leopard 2 tanks shifted from offensive spearhead to mobile defensive anchor. Ukrainian operational commanders repositioned their surviving Leopard 2A6 units as rapid reaction counterattack elements held in reserve 2 to 5 kilometers behind the main defensive line. When Russian mechanized assault groups achieved local breakthroughs along the front, Leopard 2 platoons launched pre-planned counterattacks from concealed reverse-slope positions. The defensive role played perfectly to every Leopard 2 design strength. Hold-down positions behind prepared berms exposed only the heavily armored turret face to incoming fire. The thermal imaging system identified advancing Russian armored columns at maximum effective gun range before Russian crews could acquire targets. The L-55 gun's penetration characteristics ensured first-round kills against T-72B3M and T-80BVM tanks from frontal engagement angles at ranges exceeding 1,600 meters. The Leopard 2A6 in hull-down defensive configuration exploits its low turret profile to minimize exposed target area. Only the wedge-armored turret face appears above the berm, presenting approximately 2 square meters of the hardest composite armor surface to incoming fire. The commander's independent panoramic thermal viewer provides continuous 360-degree surveillance while the gunner maintains weapon lock on the primary threat axis, enabling simultaneous target tracking and area awareness. One engagement near Avdiivka in early 2024 demonstrated the concept with textbook precision. The Russian armored column of 8 vehicles advanced through a gap that had opened in Ukrainian defensive lines. 2 Leopard 2A6 tanks engaged from flanking hull-down positions at 1,600 meters. The first Leopard 2 destroyed the lead and trail vehicles in the column within 12 seconds, boxing in the remaining 6. The second Leopard 2 engaged the trapped vehicles from a 40-degree offset angle. 4 Russian vehicles were destroyed in under 2 minutes. The remaining 4 reversed at maximum speed back through the gap. The breach was sealed in under 3 minutes without committing a single infantry squad. The entire engagement consumed 8 main gun rounds. The Leopard 2 had come full circle. Designed in the 1970s specifically to stop Soviet tank columns pouring through the Fulda Gap in central Germany. It was now doing exactly that against the successor of the same army it was built to fight. Different enemy markings. Different century. Same mission. From peacekeeping in Bosnia to full-scale mechanized warfare in Ukraine, the Leopard 2 has been tested across every spectrum of armored conflict that exists. It has been humiliated in the streets of Al-Bab and redeemed in the hills around Afrin. It has been declared obsolete by defense commentators and vindicated by crews who walked away from hits that should have killed them. 18 nations trust their armored doctrine to this single platform because 4 decades of combat data have proven one irreducible truth. The Leopard 2 does not make its crew invincible. It makes them survivable. And in armored warfare, that is everything. If this breakdown of every Leopard 2 mission changed how you think about modern armor, subscribe and hit the notification bell. The next episode goes deeper into a weapons system you think you know but do not.